Hi everyone, welcome to Talk Easy. Today, Catherine and Mike will tackle pronouns like who versus whom and this versus that. Learn how to use them correctly and sound more natural. Let's get started.
Right, so today we are going to take a deep dive into some pretty tricky grammar territory.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking pronouns.
Okay.
Specifically who versus whom.
Right.
And this versus that.
Yeah.
You know, those situations that kind of leave you second-guessing yourself?
Uh-huh.
Even after years of speaking and writing English?
It's funny how those little words can cause big headaches.
Right.
They're so small, but they can really make or break a sentence.
Yeah. And I think for me, what really trips me up is that I hear who being used all the time.
Right.
Even when I think it should be whom.
Yeah.
So I don't know, is it just me or has whom become like this endangered grammar species?
You've hit on a really interesting point there.
Have I?
Yeah. I mean, whom is definitely less common these days,
Yeah.
especially in casual conversation. You know, it's almost like it's a relic of a more formal era in the English language.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it's extinct or useless. You know, knowing when to use whom can actually give your writing a real edge, especially in those more formal situations where it's appropriate.
Okay, so it's like having a secret weapon in your grammar arsenal.
Exactly.
But before we get into all of that, I need you to remind me
Sure.
why we even have these two words.
Okay.
What's the deal with who versus whom?
So it all boils down to the roles that these pronouns play in a sentence. Who is the star?
Okay.
Who is the subject, the one doing the action? And then whom is more of a supporting player.
Okay.
Whom is the object, the one receiving the action.
Okay, I think I kind of remember that from school. But honestly, when I'm writing an email or I'm talking to someone, I don't really have time to diagram a whole sentence.
Right.
Is there like a simpler way to figure out which one to use?
Absolutely. There's a quick trick. Just imagine answering the question that you're asking.
Okay.
If you would naturally answer with he or she, then who is your guy?
Right.
But if it feels more natural to answer with him or her, then you go for whom.
Okay, so like if I ask who ate all the cookies and I could answer she ate all the cookies, that means who is correct.
You got it.
Okay, but what about something like to whom should I address this letter?
Excellent example.
Is it?
Yeah, so there you would answer, I should address it to him.
Okay.
Since him is the right pronoun there, whom is the way to go in the question.
I see. That's way easier than I thought.
Yeah.
But you said whom is becoming less common, right?
Right.
So does it really matter if I just use who all the time?
That's a good question.
Like, are the grammar police going to come knocking on my door?
No grammar police here, don't worry.
Okay.
Language is always evolving. And who has become widely accepted in many situations.
Okay.
Even when, technically whom might be more correct.
So it's more about just knowing the rules for those times when you want to use them.
Exactly.
Like when you're trying to impress someone with your writing or you're in a formal setting.
I love that. Think of it like dressing up for a special occasion. Okay. Sometimes jeans and a t-shirt are fine.
Right.
But other times you need to break out that fancy suit or dress. So in this case, whom is your grammar suit.
Okay.
Ready to make a polished impression.
Okay, I am starting to feel a lot more confident about who versus whom.
Great.
But now, how about we tackle this and that?
Sure.
They seem a bit less intimidating. But I have a feeling that there are some hidden depths there, too.
Oh, you're absolutely right. At first glance, this and that might seem like simple pointers.
Right.
But they actually pack a subtle punch in terms of meaning and emphasis.
Like, how much of a difference can they really make?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it just about whether something is like close or far away?
Well, distance is definitely part of it, both physically and in time. But there's more to it than that.
All right.
These pronouns can actually tap into the psychology of how we communicate.
Interesting.
So think about it.
Okay.
This brings things closer. It makes them feel more immediate and relevant.
Okay, so like if I said, this is the best pizza I've ever had.
Perfect.
It sounds like I'm right there savoring every bite.
Exactly. You're pulling the listener into the experience with you.
Okay.
But if you said, that pizza was pretty good, it creates more distance.
Right.
Maybe it was good at the time, but it's not really top of mind anymore.
Wow, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
So this is almost like a spotlight shining brightly on whatever you're talking about.
That's a great analogy.
Real.
And then on the flip side, that can subtly downplay importance or create contrast. It's like saying, okay, that was then, but this is now.
I'm starting to realize that these little words are way more powerful than I gave them credit for.
I know, right?
But knowing when to use this versus that still feels a bit fuzzy.
Okay.
Is there like a rule of thumb that I can follow?
Well, physical distance is the easiest one to grasp. If something is close to you, you use this. If it's farther away, you use that.
So like, this coffee is keeping me going.
Yes.
Versus that storm cloud looks ominous.
Perfect.
Okay.
Now, time can be a bit trickier.
Okay.
We often use that to refer to things in the past. It creates a sense of distance, you know?
Right.
But we can also use this for something in the past.
Really?
If it still feels relevant or connected to the present.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I could say that trip to Italy was amazing to emphasize that it's over and done with.
Yes.
But I could also say, this article I read about Italy really made me want to go back.
Exactly.
Because even though it's about something that I read in the past, it's influencing my thoughts right now.
Exactly. It's all about how close the idea feels to you in the moment. Right.
Even if it happened in the past.
Okay.
That's where the real art of using this versus that comes in.
Interesting.
It's about choosing the pronoun that best reflects your perspective.
Okay.
And how you want to frame the information.
This is really making me see pronouns in a whole new light.
I'm glad to hear that.
But I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a bit overwhelmed by all these nuances.
Right.
How can I get better at using these pronouns in a way that feels natural and confident?
Don't worry, it's a process.
Okay.
One of the best ways to improve is to simply pay attention to how these pronouns are used around you.
Okay.
Just listen to how people talk, read books and articles, even watch movies. You'll start to pick up on the subtle ways that this and that are used to create different effects.
So it's like training my ears to be pronoun detectives, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And as you become more aware of those nuances, you can start experimenting with them.
In your own speech and writing, play around with this versus that. See how it changes the meaning or the emphasis.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
And I bet there are also some common mistakes people make with these pronouns.
No, absolutely.
That we could all learn from.
Right, but I think we've covered enough ground for one deep dive.
Okay.
Let's take a pause here and come back to those common pitfalls next time.
Okay.
I think you'll be surprised by some of the things we uncover.
That sounds intriguing. I can't wait to learn more.
All right.
All right, listeners, hang tight. We'll be right back after a short break.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into pronouns.
Okay, so before the break,
we
were talking about how this and that can really shape the way we perceive information, even when we're not consciously aware of it.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
I know. Like, I always thought of them as pretty straightforward, but now I'm starting to see them as like these subtle tools for like adding layers of meaning and emphasis.
Exactly. And one area where this really comes into play is when we're talking about ideas or concepts.
Okay.
Using this can make an abstract thought feel more tangible and immediate.
Oh, I see. Like, if I was trying to explain a really complex theory, I might say, this idea of quantum entanglement is really hard to wrap your head around.
Exactly. You're using this to bring that abstract concept closer to the listener.
Okay.
Make it feel more present and relevant.
Right.
Like you're inviting them to explore it with you.
Okay, whereas if I said that theory of quantum entanglement is pretty confusing, it would just sound more distant and detached.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it can have a big impact on how the listener engages with the information.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like a bridge, connecting these abstract ideas to the here and now.
Yeah, I like that.
But what about situations where we want to create distance or contrast? Is that always the go-to in those cases?
It often is, especially when we're talking about things that are farther away in time or space. But sometimes we might use this even when talking about something in the past, if it still feels relevant to the present moment.
Oh, so it's not always a clear-cut rule.
Right.
It depends on how the speaker is connecting the idea to the present.
Exactly.
Okay, so like I could say, that party last weekend was a total blast, to emphasize that it's over and done with.
Right, and the use of that there really helps create that sense of finality.
Okay, but I could also say, this feeling I have after that party is pure exhaustion.
Exactly. Because the feeling is still lingering in the present.
Right.
So it's all about the speaker's perspective and how they're relating the information to the current moment.
This is making me really want to pay closer attention to how I use this and that from now on.
I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways.
Is it?
Yeah, from this deep dive. Just becoming more aware of these subtle choices that we make as speakers and writers.
I think so too. And I bet that awareness can also help us avoid some common pronoun pitfalls too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. You mentioned that we'd uncover some of those today.
Right. So there are definitely some traps that we can fall into.
Okay.
Even as experienced language users. One common mistake is using it when this or that would be more precise and impactful.
Ooh, I think I'm guilty of that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just default to it without really thinking about the specific pronoun that would pack more of a punch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a natural tendency, but it can make our language sound a bit bland or vague.
Okay.
You know, like, let's say you're trying to recommend a book to a friend.
Okay.
You could say, it's a really interesting book.
Right.
But if you want to really grab their attention, you might say, this book is absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, this just makes it so much more personal and engaging.
Right. It's like you're sharing your excitement directly with them.
Okay, so it's not just about being grammatically correct. It's about using the right pronoun to create the effect that you want.
Exactly.
What are some other common mistakes people make with this and that?
Another one is forgetting to match this and that with the number of the noun they're referring to.
Okay.
It's a simple rule, but it's easy to slip up.
Right.
Especially when we're speaking quickly.
Yeah, like you wouldn't say, these are my favorite shoes.
Right.
You'd say, these are my favorite shoes.
Exactly.
Because a shoes is plural, so you need the plural form of this, which is these.
Precisely. It's all about making sure your pronouns agree with the nouns they're referencing.
Okay.
You know, it's a bit like making sure your verbs agree with their subjects. It just sounds more polished and correct when everything lines up.
Right. It's funny how these little grammar rules can make such a big impact on how we sound.
They really do.
But I have to admit, I'm starting to feel like
Yeah.
I'm drowning in grammar rules.
I know, it can be a lot.
Like, is there any way to make all this feel less overwhelming?
The key is to not get too bogged down in the technicalities.
Okay.
Think of it more like developing an ear for the language.
Okay.
The more you listen to how native speakers use these pronouns in different situations, the more natural it will become for you.
Right. It's like anything else.
Exactly.
The more you practice, the easier it gets.
Right. And I bet paying attention to how authors and speakers use this and that can also help us become more aware of those subtle shades of meaning that we were talking about earlier.
Right, like we're encouraging our listeners to become pronoun connoisseurs.
Yes.
Savoring the nuances.
Exactly.
Appreciating the artistry of it all.
I love that.
And as you develop that appreciation, you'll find that your own use of language becomes more precise, more impactful, more engaging.
Well said.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me.
I'm glad.
I already started to see these pronouns in a whole new light.
Good.
But before we wrap up,
I
want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea that whom is becoming less common in modern English.
Right. It's true. In many ways, whom is facing an uphill battle against the tide of casual language.
So what's the future of whom? Will it eventually go extinct? Or is there a chance it will make a comeback?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone has a crystal ball to predict the future of language, but I do think that there's a place for whom, even in our modern, fast-paced world.
Why do you think that?
Yeah.
What makes whom worth preserving?
Well, for one thing, it adds a level of formality and polish that can be very effective in certain situations.
Like what?
Like, think about legal documents, academic writing, or even just a well-crafted letter or email. Using whom correctly in these contexts can make your writing stand out.
Right.
Convey a sense of professionalism and attention to detail.
It's like that saying, the devil's in the details.
Exactly.
Sometimes those small choices can make a big difference in how we're perceived. And while it's true that whom is often dropped in casual conversation, there are still situations where using it correctly can actually enhance your communication, even in informal settings.
Exactly.
Really. I'm curious, like, when would using whom actually be a good choice in casual conversation?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
Sometimes we want to create a certain effect with our language.
Right.
Even when we're just chatting with friends or family, maybe we want to be playful or sarcastic or even a big traumatic.
Okay.
And in those cases, using whom can add a touch of irony or humor.
Right.
Or even just signal that we're being deliberately formal for effect.
So it's like a linguistic wink.
Exactly.
Letting the listener know that you're playing with the rules a little bit.
Yeah.
And that can be a fun and effective way to use language.
Right. Of course, it's all about reading the situation, knowing your audience.
Right.
But when used skillfully, whom can add a delightful layer of nuance and sophistication.
Okay. This is really making me rethink my whole relationship with whom.
Good. I'm glad.
I used to think of it as this, like, stuffy, outdated word.
Yeah.
But now I'm starting to see its potential. It's like a forgotten treasure, just waiting to be rediscovered.
I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Have I?
And who knows, maybe with a little effort, we can help bring whom back into the spotlight.
I'm up for the challenge. All right, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From the subtle power of this and that to the surprising versatility of whom.
Right.
But there's still more to explore.
Yes.
In the world of pronouns.
Right.
We'll be back after a short break to delve into some final thoughts and takeaways.
That's good.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to our Pronoun Power-Up. It feels like we've really journeyed through like the hidden depths of these seemingly simple words, you know?
It really is remarkable how much we take pronouns for granted.
Right.
They're like the invisible scaffolding of language.
Yeah, and we've seen how even like small choices, like who versus whom or this versus that, can have such a big impact on, you know, how we express ourselves and how we connect with others.
Absolutely. It's all about being mindful and intentional with our language.
Right.
Recognizing that these tiny words actually carry a lot of weight.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive, what are some key takeaways that you'd want our listeners to remember?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they've gained a new appreciation for the complexity and the artistry of pronoun usage.
Right.
It's not just about following rules. It's about using these words as tools to shape meaning and create nuanced effects.
Right, like we've been encouraging them to become pronoun masters.
Exactly.
Wielding their newfound knowledge with confidence and creativity.
And as they continue to explore the world of pronouns, I would encourage them to embrace the challenge and have fun with it. Language is a playground, and pronouns are some of the most versatile toys in the box.
So don't be afraid to experiment, right? Like try swapping out this for that in a sentence and see how it changes the feeling. Or play around with who versus whom in different contexts.
Right.
You might be surprised by the results.
And most importantly, pay attention to how these pronouns are used around you.
Right.
Listen to how people talk, read books and articles, even watch movies with a critical ear. And you'll start to internalize these nuances and develop an intuitive sense of what sounds right.
It's like training your inner grammar guru.
Precisely. And the more you practice, the more confident you'll become in your own use of pronouns.
That's great advice.
Thank you.
As we conclude our deep dive into pronouns,
I
want to leave our listeners with a final thought.
Okay.
Remember, language is a living, breathing thing.
It is.
It's constantly evolving and adapting to our needs as communicators.
And that means there's always something new to discover, some hidden depth to explore.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to challenge the rules. Play with language and find your own unique voice.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Oh.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive and that you'll continue to explore the fascinating world of pronouns.
Absolutely.
Until next time, happy communicating.